The night air hung thick with the promise of rain as Sam Travers parked his battered SUV outside a nondescript government building. The skies above were dark, ominous clouds swirling as if nature itself was trying to warn him to turn back. He adjusted his leather jacket and checked his reflection in the rearview mirror. His eyes, once bright and full of life, now held the weight of 1,000 nightmares. Sam wasn't the same man he used to be. After leading several paranormal investigations that nearly cost him his life, he had sworn never to return to the field. But when a cryptic letter arrived at his doorstep, sealed with the insignia of a governmental agency he thought he'd never hear from again, he felt that familiar chill in his spine, a mixture of dread and curiosity. The letter had been brief, almost too brief. Your expertise is needed. Crescent Ballroom. Midnight. He stepped out of the car and walked into the building, its fluorescent lights flickering as if reacting to his presence. Inside, he was greeted by Agent Kara Mullins, a woman whose stern face was as unreadable as a stone statue. They exchanged no pleasantries, only a curt nod from her as she led him down a series of labyrinthine hallways, each one more sterile and clinical than the last. They entered a dimly lit room, where a few others were gathered around a large, wooden table. The room was heavy with tension. At the head of the table stood Dr. Harold Wainwright, a renowned parapsychologist who had long been thought dead. His presence alone sent a wave of unease through Sam. "Glad you could join us, Sam," Wainwright said, his voice gravelly as if he hadn't spoken in years. "We have a situation." Wainwright tossed a file onto the table. Sam hesitated before picking it up, opening it to find grainy black and white photos of what appeared to be a grand ballroom, its ornate chandeliers, once the pride of the Crescent Hotel, now a web of shadows and decay. But it wasn't the dilapidated grandeur that made his heart skip a beat. It was the figures captured in those photos, frozen mid-dance, their faces distorted into masks of terror. "Why me?" Sam asked, his voice barely masking his apprehension. "Because you've dealt with the impossible before," Wainwright replied, his eyes piercing through the dim light. "And because we don't have a choice." The room fell silent as Sam stared at the photos, feeling the dread settle in his bones. He was about to walk back into the darkness he had fought so hard to escape. "Fine," Sam muttered, tossing the file back on the table. "But if we're doing this, I'm calling the shots." "Agreed," Wainwright said, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "Welcome back to the nightmare." As Sam left the building, the rain began to fall, washing away the last remnants of his resolve. There was no turning back now. The Crescent Ballroom awaited, and with it, whatever horrors danced within its cursed walls. The drive to the Crescent Ballroom was uneventful, but the atmosphere grew heavier with every mile closer. The road twisted through the dense forest like a serpent, flanked by towering trees that seemed to close in around Sam's SUV. The only sound was the constant patter of rain against the windshield, a rhythmic drumming that did little to calm his nerves. As the trees parted, the Crescent Hotel loomed ahead, its once magnificent facade now a grim reminder of forgotten opulence. The ballroom was hidden within its depths, a place long abandoned by the living and claimed by something far darker. Sam parked his SUV in the cracked lot, stepping out into the cold, wet night. He was joined by the rest of the team, Kara Mullins, who was already checking her gear with military precision, Dr. Wainwright, who clutched a leather-bound journal as though it were a lifeline, and Marcus, a stoic figure who was introduced only as security. Sam didn't trust him, didn't trust any of them, really, but they were all he had. "Let's get this over with," Sam muttered, grabbing his flashlight and walking towards the grand entrance of the hotel. The door creaked open with an eerie wail as they stepped inside, their flashlights slicing through the darkness. The hotel's interior was a shadow of its former self, grand staircases now rotting and crumbling, tapestries that once told stories of elegance now reduced to moldy rags. But the most unsettling aspect was the silence. It was the kind of silence that felt alive, as if the building itself was holding its breath. They made their way to the ballroom, the heart of the hotel's mystery. The corridor leading to it was lined with mirrors, each one cracked and clouded with age. As Sam passed by, He caught glimpses of movement in the corners of his eyes, shadows that flickered and danced just out of sight. He forced himself to focus, knowing that acknowledging them would only give them power. At last, they reached the double doors of the ballroom. Sam hesitated, feeling the weight of the moment. He knew that once they crossed this threshold, there would be no turning back. He pushed the doors open, revealing a sight that was both beautiful and horrifying. The ballroom was untouched by time. Its chandeliers glittered as if they were still hosting lavish parties, and the floor was polished to a mirror-like sheen. But the air was thick with something else, an overwhelming sense of despair, as if the room itself mourned its forgotten glory. Suddenly, the chandeliers flickered, casting long, twisted shadows across the walls. The temperature plummeted, and a low hum began to fill the room, growing louder with each passing second. "Get ready," Sam warned, as the air seemed to tremble around them. The hum became a roar, and then, with a deafening crash, the mirrors lining the ballroom shattered, raining shards of glass like deadly confetti. Out of the darkness, figures began to emerge, phantoms draped in tattered remnants of formal wear, their hollow eyes fixed on the intruders. And then, as if obeying an unseen conductor, the ghosts began to waltz, their movements graceful yet filled with an unspeakable sadness. But this was no ordinary dance. Sam could feel it, an energy, a ritual. This waltz was a calling, a summoning of something far more sinister. The team was not just witnessing a haunting, they were part of a macabre ceremony that had been waiting decades to be completed. And now, the dance had only just begun. The ballroom's spectral waltz continued, but Sam couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. These ghosts, with their hollow eyes and fluid movements, were not merely trapped spirits, they were puppets, dancing to the tune of something darker. The air was thick with an electric charge, as if the very fabric of reality was fraying at the edges. "Stay close," Sam whispered, his voice barely audible over the eerie melody that filled the room. Kara nodded, her face pale but determined. Wainwright, clutching his journal, appeared lost in thought, his eyes darting around the room as if trying to decipher a riddle only he could see. Marcus, ever the silent sentinel, scanned the room, his hand hovering over his holstered weapon. The walls of the ballroom began to pulse, the old wallpaper shifting as if alive. Images started to bleed through the walls, faded snapshots of past events. The team watched in horror as the room became a living memory, replaying the last moments of the souls who had perished here. A young couple, dressed in fine 1920s attire, twirled across the floor. The woman's dress was stained with blood, a dark red that seemed to pulse with each step. They danced closer to the team, their eyes vacant, as if they were aware of the living yet unable to interact. And then the scene shifted. The ballroom, now filled with people, was in the middle of a grand event. Laughter and music echoed through the space, a stark contrast to the terror that had unfolded just moments ago. But the joy was short-lived. A scream pierced the air, followed by a violent explosion. The guests vanished in a cloud of smoke and fire, their bodies thrown across the room like rag dolls. "It's like the room is alive," Kara muttered, her voice tinged with fear, reliving its worst moments over and over. Sam's eyes narrowed as he took a step forward, his focus shifting to the chandelier above them. It swayed, not with the rhythm of the dance, but as if something unseen was pulling at it. There was a pattern here, a sequence of events that they were being forced to witness. "We're not just watching," Sam said slowly, realization dawning on him. "We're being shown something. The room is trying to tell us what happened here." Suddenly, Wainwright's journal flew open, the pages flipping rapidly as if possessed by a strong gust of wind. The old man's eyes widened in horror as he tried to grab the book, but it was too late. The pages settled on a sketch, a crude drawing of a figure shrouded in darkness, its face obscured, but its intent clear. This was the conductor, the force behind the macabre dance. Before anyone could react, the ballroom's doors slammed shut with a thunderous bang, sealing the team inside. The chandeliers flickered once more, and the temperature plummeted to freezing. A low growl echoed through the room, resonating deep in their bones. "What the hell was that?" Marcus barked, his hand now firmly on his weapon. Sam didn't answer. He knew what it was. The real threat was no longer the ghosts, they were merely the bait. The true predator had finally revealed itself, and it was hungry. As the growl grew louder, the team braced themselves for the inevitable. This was no longer just an investigation. It was a fight for survival against an ancient, malevolent force that had been waiting patiently for them to arrive. And the ballroom? It was merely the entrance to its lair. The growl reverberated through the ballroom, shaking the walls and sending vibrations through the floor. Sam could feel the menace in the sound, a deep, guttural threat that set his nerves on edge. He motioned for the team to spread out, each of them instinctively falling into a defensive position. "Stay alert," Sam hissed, his eyes scanning the dark corners of the room. The chandeliers above flickered violently, casting distorted shadows that danced erratically across the walls. The air was heavy, almost suffocating, as if the room itself was squeezing them. Wainwright stepped forward, his journal clutched tightly in his hands. He flipped through the pages frantically, searching for something. His breath came in short, panicked gasps as he finally stopped on a page filled with ancient symbols. "It's here," Wainwright muttered, his voice trembling. "The conductor. It's not just a spirit. It's a gatekeeper, a guardian of this place. The souls here aren't trapped by chance. They were sacrificed to it." "Sacrificed?" Kara repeated, her voice shaky. "To what?" Before Wainwright could respond, the ballroom erupted in chaos. The mirrors that lined the walls shattered simultaneously, sending shards of glass flying through the air. The team ducked instinctively, covering their faces as the glass rained down around them. When the storm subsided, the mirrors were replaced by darkness, deep, impenetrable voids that seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. From these voids, figures began to emerge. But these weren't the ghosts from before. These were twisted, monstrous versions of the waltzing phantoms, creatures with elongated limbs and distorted features. Their eyes glowed with an eerie, malevolent light, and their mouths twisted into grotesque grins. "The conductor," Wainwright whispered, backing away as the creatures advanced. "It's using them to draw us in. We're the final act in its symphony." Sam felt a cold sweat trickle down his back as he watched the creatures approach. They moved in unison, like marionettes controlled by an unseen hand. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, as if they were being forced to dance against their will. "We need to get out of here," Sam said urgently, glancing at the sealed doors. But before they could make a move, the creatures lunged, their long limbs reaching out to ensnare them. Marcus was the first to react, pulling out his weapon and firing at the nearest creature. The gunshots echoed through the ballroom, but the bullets passed through the creatures as if they were made of smoke. They continued their advance, undeterred by the attack. "Bullets won't work," Wainwright shouted, clutching his journal like a shield. "These things aren't bound by the same rules as us." Sam cursed under his breath as he grabbed a broken chair leg from the floor, brandishing it like a club. The creatures were almost upon them now, their twisted forms closing in from all sides. There was no time to think, no time to plan. They had to fight or be consumed by the darkness. With a primal scream, Sam swung the chair leg at the nearest creature, the wood passing through it harmlessly. But as the creature recoiled, a spark of energy erupted from the impact point, sending it stumbling back. "They're not invincible," Sam shouted, swinging again and again. Each strike sent ripples of energy through the creatures, momentarily disrupting their form. But there were too many of them, and with each step back, they were being herded closer to the center of the room, right where the conductor wanted them. Wainwright frantically scribbled in his journal, chanting under his breath as he tried to summon some kind of protection. But it was no use. The conductor's will was too strong, its influence too pervasive. As the creatures closed in, Sam realized with a sinking feeling that they were out of options. The conductor had orchestrated this moment perfectly. They weren't just participants in this nightmare, they were the finale. And the curtain was about to fall. The ballroom had transformed into a nightmare, a twisted symphony of terror orchestrated by the conductor. Sam, Kara, Marcus, and Wainwright were surrounded, their makeshift weapons barely holding off the relentless onslaught of twisted phantoms. The air was thick with the acrid smell of fear, but through the chaos, Sam noticed something, an eerie, melodic hum that seemed to be calling to them from deep within the building. "Do you hear that?" Sam asked, his voice cutting through the cacophony. The others, caught in their desperate struggle, paused for a moment. The hum grew louder, more insistent, weaving its way through their minds like a hypnotic lullaby. "It's coming from below," Wainwright said, his eyes wide with realization. "The conductor, it's luring us to the source of its power." Before anyone could respond, the ground beneath them began to tremble. The marble floor cracked, splintering into jagged pieces as a dark void opened beneath their feet. One by one, they were pulled into the abyss, the siren's call growing louder, more intoxicating, until it drowned out all thought. They tumbled through darkness, their senses overwhelmed by the haunting melody that seemed to guide their descent. When they finally landed, the impact was jarring, knocking the wind from their lungs. They found themselves in a vast, subterranean chamber, its walls lined with ancient, arcane symbols that glowed with an unnatural light. "This is the heart of it," Wainwright whispered, his voice trembling with awe and terror. The source of the conductor's power. The chamber pulsed with energy, the air thick with the oppressive weight of malevolent spirits. At the far end of the room stood an enormous pipe organ, its keys moving of their own accord, playing the same hypnotic melody that had lured them here. But this was no ordinary organ. The pipes were made of bone, the keys fashioned from what appeared to be human teeth. The instrument's sound resonated through the chamber, reverberating in their bones, compelling them to move closer despite their instincts screaming to flee. Kara took a hesitant step forward, her eyes glazed over, as if in a trance. "We have to destroy it," she murmured, her voice distant, almost mechanical. "It's the only way to break the conductor's hold." "But how?" Marcus asked, gripping his weapon tightly, though he knew it would be useless against something so otherworldly. Wainwright, still clutching his journal, began frantically flipping through the pages, searching for any clue, any spell that could help. "There has to be a way," he muttered, more to himself than to the others. A counter-melody, something to disrupt its power. But as he searched, the organ's song grew louder, drowning out his thoughts, making it impossible to focus. The room seemed to close in around them, the walls shifting and warping as if they were alive, breathing with the rhythm of the music. And then, without warning, the organ stopped. Silence fell over the chamber, thick and suffocating. The absence of sound was almost worse than the melody. It was a void, a gaping maw that threatened to swallow them whole. In the deafening silence, they heard it, a single note, clear and pure, emanating from the darkness. It cut through the silence like a blade, sharp and cold. The organ was not the source of the conductor's power. It was merely the instrument. The true source lay deeper, in the darkness beyond. As they stared into the abyss, the note echoed, growing louder, closer. Something was coming, something far more powerful and dangerous than the phantoms they had faced in the ballroom. The siren's call had been a lure, drawing them deeper into the conductor's domain. Now, they were about to face the true horror that lay at the heart of this cursed place. And this time, there would be no escape. The oppressive silence that followed the cessation of the organ's haunting melody left the group unnerved. The air in the subterranean chamber was thick, almost tangible, as though the very atmosphere was imbued with the essence of the unspeakable horrors that lurked within the darkness. The single pure note that echoed from the abyss beyond seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, calling them closer with an undeniable pull. "We need to move," Sam urged, his voice barely more than a whisper in the suffocating quiet. "Whatever that sound is, it's not going to wait for us to figure out what to do next." Kara, still entranced by the haunting beauty of the note, nodded slowly, her mind foggy but her resolve firm. "It's pulling us in, Sam. We have to find it, destroy it, before it consumes us." Reluctantly, the group advanced toward the darkness from which the note emanated. Each step echoed in the cavernous chamber, the sound amplified tenfold by the oppressive silence that surrounded them. The walls seemed to close in, shifting and warping as though they were alive, bending to the will of the entity that called to them. As they ventured deeper, the note grew louder, more insistent, until it was all they could hear. It thrummed through their bones, resonating in their skulls, driving out all thought. Sam felt as though his very soul was vibrating in tune with the sound, pulled inexorably toward whatever horror lay ahead. Suddenly, the tunnel widened into a vast underground cavern, the sheer size of which was lost in the shadows that cloaked its periphery. In the center of the cavern stood a massive, ancient stone dais, carved with intricate symbols that glowed with an eerie, pulsating light. Atop the dais stood a tall, robed figure, its back turned to them, its presence radiating an overwhelming sense of dread. The figure was the source of the note, its voice an unnatural, keening wail that pierced the air like a blade. The sound was painful, almost unbearable, and yet the group was drawn to it, compelled to approach. As they neared the dais, the robed figure slowly turned to face them. It was not human. Its face was a mask of shadows, ever-shifting and impossible to focus on. Where eyes should have been, there was only a void, an emptiness that seemed to swallow the very light around it. The conductor, Wainwright, breathed, his voice trembling with fear. He clutched his journal tighter, as though it might somehow protect him from the abomination before them. The conductor raised one shadowy hand, and the note intensified, its pitch rising to a level that made the air itself vibrate. The group staggered back, their hands clamped over their ears, but the sound was inside them now, reverberating through their very beings. Kara screamed, a blood-curdling sound that was lost in the wail. She fell to her knees, clutching her head as though trying to hold her skull together. Sam, struggling to remain standing, saw that the symbols on the dais were growing brighter, pulsating in time with the note. It's drawing power from the music. Wainwright shouted over the din, his voice barely audible. We have to break the spell. But how? Sam thought, despair clawing at him. How could they possibly fight against something so ancient, so powerful? Suddenly, Marcus, who had been silent through most of the ordeal, stepped forward. His face was set in grim determination as he pulled something from his pocket, a small, silver whistle. Without hesitation, he blew into it, producing a piercing, discordant note that cut through the conductor's wail like a knife. The effect was immediate. The conductor recoiled, its shadowy form writhing as though in agony. The symbols on the dais flickered, their light dimming as the discordant note disrupted the conductor's song. Keep going, Sam shouted, realizing what Marcus was doing. Don't let it regain control. Marcus blew the whistle again and again, each note more jarring than the last. The conductor's form began to waver, the shadows peeling away to reveal something hideous and malformed, writhing beneath the cloak of darkness. But the conductor was not defeated yet. With a final, desperate surge, it unleashed a blast of dark energy, sending Marcus flying across the cavern. He hit the ground hard, the whistle clattering from his hand. The conductor, weakened but still dangerous, advanced on them, its form flickering like a dying flame. The group was out of time, out of options. As the entity loomed over them, Sam realized with a sinking heart that their battle was far from over. They had merely awakened the true horror that lurked beneath the ballroom. As the conductor loomed over them, the once grand and majestic ballroom was now a twisted reflection of its former self, a nightmarish landscape where reality bent and warped under the oppressive weight of malevolent energy. The air buzzed with an unholy resonance, as though the very walls were groaning under the strain of holding back the darkness that threatened to consume everything. Sam, bruised and barely holding on, scrambled to his feet, his mind racing. The conductor's presence had only intensified, the shadowy figure's form now barely tethered to this reality. It seemed to flicker in and out of existence, its features distorting into grotesque shapes before solidifying into something almost human again. The discordant note that Marcus had unleashed had damaged it, but the conductor was adapting, its song shifting, twisting to regain control. We can't let it finish the melody, Kara whispered urgently, her eyes wide with terror as she clutched at Sam's arm. If it does, we're done. Wainwright, still clutching his precious journal, began frantically scribbling notes, his mind working at a feverish pace. He muttered to himself, his words almost lost in the rising cacophony that filled the room. The key, there have to be a counterspell, something. Sam's thoughts were chaotic, but one thing was clear, they had to act fast. But how do you fight a creature that bends the rules of reality itself? His gaze darted around the room, searching for anything that could help them. The conductor was nearing them, its form warping as it drew closer, the atmosphere thickening with dread. Suddenly, the walls of the ballroom began to ripple like water, and faint echoes, memories of the past, began to emerge. Ghostly figures danced to a haunting waltz that wasn't there, their movements fluid yet broken, like marionettes controlled by an unseen hand. Their faces were pale, their eyes hollow, reflecting the despair that had taken hold of this place. The ballroom's history, it's feeding on it, Sam realized with a shock. It's drawing power from the tragedies that happened here. Kara's gaze followed his, and understanding dawned on her. That's it. The conductor is using the sorrow and despair of these spirits to fuel its power. We need to sever that connection. Wainwright's eyes lit up as the pieces fell into place. We need to disrupt the echoes, he said, his voice filled with renewed determination. If we can break the cycle, the conductor will lose its grip on this place. But how? The memories were everywhere, entangled with the fabric of the ballroom itself. The air was heavy with sorrow, and the echoes were growing stronger, more real by the second. Sam felt a wave of hopelessness wash over him, threatening to drag him under. And then it hit him. The chandeliers, he shouted, pointing to the massive crystal chandeliers hanging precariously from the ceiling. They're connected to the past. If we destroy them, it might shatter the link. Without waiting for a response, Sam grabbed a fallen piece of debris and hurled it with all his strength at the nearest chandelier. The crystal structure exploded in a shower of glass, and for a brief moment, the ghostly figures flickered and vanished, the echo of their waltz fading. Yes! Kara cried out as she and Wainwright followed suit, attacking the remaining chandeliers with whatever they could find. One by one, the massive structures crashed to the ground, shattering into 1,000 pieces. With each chandelier that fell, the ballroom seemed to warp and distort further, as though the very fabric of reality was unraveling. The ghostly echoes grew weaker, their forms dissolving into mist as the connection to their tragic past was severed. But the conductor was not defeated. It let out a blood-curdling scream, a sound of pure rage and agony as its power source was torn away. Its form flickered violently, destabilizing, but it was not yet gone. The shadowy figure lashed out, sending a wave of dark energy toward the group. Sam barely had time to react as the wave hit him like a freight train, sending him crashing to the floor. Pain seared through his body, and for a moment, all he could see was darkness. But in that darkness, he heard something, a faint, almost inaudible whisper. It was the same melody the conductor had been using, but softer, more melodic, and filled with an overwhelming sense of loss. And then he understood. The conductor wasn't just a creature of darkness, it was a tragic figure, a being caught in its own endless loop of despair, reliving the moments of its own downfall. With a Herculean effort, Sam pushed himself up, gasping for breath. Wainwright, the melody, play it backward. It's not just a weapon, it's a cry for help. Wainwright, eyes wide with realization, fumbled with his notes. His hands trembled as he scribbled the musical notation in reverse. Kara, understanding the gravity of the situation, moved to protect him from the conductor's rage. With the last of his strength, Wainwright began to hum the reversed melody. The effect was immediate. The conductor's form began to stabilize, its shadowy visage softening as the melody resonated through the chamber. The air around them seemed to still, the oppressive weight lifting as the melody reached its peak. The conductor's form flickered one last time before it dissolved into a cascade of light, leaving only silence in its wake. The group was left standing in the ruins of the ballroom, breathless and shaken, but alive. The shadows had receded, and the ghostly echoes were no more. The conductor was gone, but its tragic story remained etched in their minds, a haunting reminder of the power of sorrow and despair. The silence after the conductor's defeat was almost unbearable. The ballroom, now stripped of its malevolent grandeur, felt like a gaping wound, oozing despair from the dark corners where the light couldn't reach. Sam, Kara, and Wainwright stood amidst the shattered remnants of chandeliers, their breath ragged, their minds still reeling from the confrontation. "We need to keep moving," Sam said, his voice cutting through the stillness. He looked around, his eyes narrowing as they landed on the grand staircase that led down into the belly of the building. "There's something deeper in this place, something worse." "I can feel it." Kara, still trembling, nodded. "We can't just leave it. Whatever it is, it's connected to everything that's happened here. If we don't end it now, it'll keep coming for us." Wainwright, clutching his journal like a lifeline, began to descend the staircase. "There's a pattern to all of this," he muttered. "A story buried in the walls, in the very foundation of this place. We need to uncover it before it consumes us." The stairs creaked ominously beneath their weight, the sound echoing off the cold, damp stone walls. The deeper they descended, the thicker the air became, as if they were entering the lungs of a great beast, the darkness pressing in from all sides. At the bottom of the stairs, they found themselves in a narrow, low-ceilinged corridor. The walls were lined with old, rotting wood, and the floor was slick with moisture. A faint, barely perceptible whisper filled the air, like the hushed voices of 1,000 souls murmuring secrets they could never speak aloud. Sam felt a chill crawl up his spine. This place, it's alive. It's feeding off our fear. Kara's eyes darted around, searching the darkness. "Do you hear that? The whispering. It's like it's trying to tell us something." Wainwright paused, his hand tracing a strange symbol carved into the wall. "These markings, they're old, ancient. This isn't just a building. It's a monument, an altar to something dark and forgotten." As they moved further down the corridor, the whispering grew louder, more insistent. The walls seemed to pulse with every word, the very structure of the building warping as though it was alive, shifting and breathing around them. The floor beneath them began to tremble, the vibrations growing stronger with each step. At the end of the corridor, they came to a large, rusted iron door. The whispering was louder here, almost deafening, as if the door itself was speaking to them, urging them to enter. Sam hesitated, his hand hovering over the door's handle. "We don't have a choice," Wainwright said, his voice low but steady. "Whatever is behind this door, it's the heart of this place. We have to face it." With a deep breath, Sam pushed the door open. It groaned loudly, echoing through the narrow hallway like a death knell. Beyond the door was a vast, circular chamber, the walls lined with rows of alcoves, each one filled with ancient relics and tattered remnants of the past. At the center of the chamber stood a massive stone pedestal, covered in strange symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light. But it wasn't the pedestal that drew their attention. It was the figure standing before it, shrouded in darkness. Its form was indistinct, a shadowy silhouette that seemed to shift and writhe as if it was made of the very essence of the darkness that surrounded it. The whispering voices intensified, their words becoming clearer, more coherent. They were chanting, repeating the same phrase over and over again in a language none of them could understand. The figure began to move, its shape shifting and distorting as it turned to face them. Who are you?" Kara's voice was barely a whisper, her fear palpable. The figure didn't respond with words. Instead, it raised a hand, and the chamber was filled with a blinding light. Sam felt a searing pain in his chest, as though something was trying to tear him apart from the inside. He dropped to his knees, clutching his chest as the light intensified, burning through his vision, his mind. He could hear Kara screaming and Wainwright shouting something, but the pain was too much. The light was burning away everything, his thoughts, his memories, his very soul. But then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the light faded. The pain was gone, replaced by a deep, suffocating cold. Sam opened his eyes to find himself lying on the cold stone floor, the chamber dark and silent once more. The figure was gone, but the pedestal remained, its symbols now glowing brightly, pulsing with a dark, malevolent energy. Sam struggled to his feet, his body weak, his mind reeling. "We need to destroy it," Wainwright said, his voice shaky but determined. "Whatever that was, it's bound to this place by the pedestal. If we can break it, we might be able to end this." Sam nodded, still dazed. "But how? We don't even know what we're dealing with." Before Wainwright could respond, the whispering returned, louder than ever. The walls of the chamber began to close in, the darkness pressing down on them, suffocating them. "We don't have time to figure it out," Kara said, her voice tinged with panic. "We need to act now." Wainwright took a deep breath and stepped toward the pedestal. "Then we'll figure it out as we go." As Wainwright approached the pedestal, the shadows in the room began to move again, coalescing into another figure, one that was far more solid, far more real. It stepped out of the darkness, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light, and raised a hand. The walls began to shake violently, and the floor cracked open beneath them, revealing a bottomless abyss. The figure advanced toward them, its presence overwhelming, suffocating. "We're out of time," Sam muttered, his heart pounding in his chest. "Do it, Wainwright." "Now!" Wainwright raised his journal, muttering an incantation he had scribbled in the margins, a desperate attempt at an exorcism, or perhaps something darker. The air grew thick with energy, and the symbols on the pedestal flared brighter. The figure screamed, a sound that echoed through the chamber like a death wail. It lunged at Wainwright, but as it did, the symbols on the pedestal exploded in a burst of light. The chamber shook violently, the floor splitting open further as the light consumed the figure, ripping it apart with a final, agonized scream. The walls began to collapse around them, the chamber disintegrating into a void of swirling darkness. Sam grabbed Kara and Wainwright, dragging them toward the iron door as the chamber fell apart. They barely made it through before the door slammed shut behind them, sealing the darkness away. As they stumbled back into the corridor, the whispering finally ceased, leaving only silence in its wake. Sam leaned against the wall, his body trembling with exhaustion. "We did it," he whispered, more to himself than to the others. "It's over." But as they looked back at the door, they knew it wasn't over, not completely. They had stopped the darkness, but it was still there, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the moment when it could rise again. For now, though, they were alive, and that was enough. But the darkness was patient, and it never truly sleeps. The aftermath of the battle left the ballroom in eerie silence, but the air crackled with an undercurrent of unease. Sam, Kara, and Wainwright were barely holding on, their energy spent, their minds frayed from the confrontation with the conductor. As they moved through the now dormant space, a strange stillness settled over them, the once grand ballroom now nothing more than a tomb of forgotten memories. As they prepared to leave, a faint sound reached their ears, a soft, haunting melody. It was the same lullaby that had once lured them deeper into the ballroom's twisted reality, but now it was softer, almost pleading. They exchanged wary glances. Could this be another trap, or something else entirely? "Sam, do you hear that?" Kara's voice was barely above a whisper, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of danger. Sam nodded, his hand tightening around the flashlight. "It's coming from over there." The sound seemed to be emanating from the far corner of the room, where the shadows were deepest. With trepidation, they approached the source of the melody, their footsteps echoing in the stillness. As they neared, the shadows began to shift and part, revealing a hidden door, an ancient, ornately carved wooden panel that had somehow escaped their notice until now. Without a word, Wainwright pushed the door open, and they were immediately hit by a rush of cold air. The lullaby grew louder, clearer, as they descended a narrow staircase that spiraled deep into the bowels of the building. The walls were lined with flickering candle sconces, casting long, dancing shadows as they made their way down. The stairs opened up into a vast underground chamber, a hidden catacomb that stretched endlessly in all directions. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, and the melody echoed off the stone walls, creating a disorienting, almost hypnotic effect. At the center of the chamber stood an ancient, crumbling altar. Surrounding it were rows of stone sarcophagi, their lids slightly ajar as though something or someone had recently disturbed their eternal rest. The melody was coming from a small music box sitting atop the altar, its mechanism slowly turning as it played its mournful tune. Who? Who built this place? Kara's voice was shaky, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and awe. This isn't just a ballroom, Wainwright said, his voice trembling. It's a mausoleum, a final resting place for something. Sam reached out and carefully lifted the music box from the altar. The instant he did, the melody stopped, and the chamber was plunged into silence. But the silence was short-lived. From the darkness around them, the sound of shuffling feet and low, guttural growls began to fill the air. "They're waking up," Sam whispered, his heart pounding in his chest. "We need to get out of here now." But as they turned to leave, the shadows around the chamber began to coalesce, forming into indistinct, humanoid shapes. The air grew colder, the atmosphere heavy with malevolence as the ancient spirits of the catacombs stirred, drawn to the living intruders in their midst. One by one, the sarcophagi lids began to slide open, the scraping of stone against stone echoing through the chamber. Sam's grip tightened on the music box as he realized they were surrounded, with no clear way out. "We're not going to make it," Kara said, her voice a desperate whisper. "We have to," Wainwright replied, his tone determined despite the fear in his eyes. "There's got to be another way, something we missed." But before they could act, the ghostly figures lunged toward them, their forms flickering like shadows as they closed in. The chamber was filled with the sound of the undead, their moans reverberating off the walls as they moved in for the kill. Sam's mind raced. They were outnumbered, outmatched, and running out of time. In a last-ditch effort, he hurled the music box into the air, its tiny mechanism still ticking. The music box shattered against the stone floor, and for a moment, the spirits hesitated, their forms flickering as though disrupted by the sudden destruction of the melody source. "Run!" Sam shouted, grabbing Kara and Wainwright and pulling them toward the staircase. They sprinted up the stairs, the sound of the undead hot on their heels. The walls of the catacomb seemed to close in around them as they ascended, the darkness pressing down from all sides. Just as they reached the top, the hidden door slammed shut behind them, cutting off the pursuit. Breathing heavily, they found themselves back in the ballroom, the air strangely still and calm once more. The shadows that had haunted them were gone, and the room was silent, save for the sound of their own ragged breathing. We're alive," Kara said, her voice barely above a whisper, as though she couldn't quite believe it. But Sam knew better. They had escaped the catacombs, but they had not left the darkness behind. The spirits they had disturbed were not gone, they were merely waiting, biding their time until they could strike again. The ballroom, the catacombs, the entire building, they were all connected, all part of the same twisted nightmare. And as Sam looked around at the shattered remnants of the chandeliers and the broken fragments of their sanity, he knew that their ordeal was far from over. The ballroom's silent calm was an illusion, a momentary respite from the horrors that lurked just beneath the surface. Sam, Kara, and Wainwright knew they couldn't stay. The building was alive with malevolence, a dark entity that thrived on the despair and fear of those who dared to enter. "We can't stay here," Sam said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. "We need to find a way out. There has to be an exit that doesn't lead back into that hellhole." Wainwright nodded, his gaze darting around the room. "There's one place we haven't checked, the ballroom's original entrance. If this place was designed to trap people, then the exit might be hidden in plain sight." Kara, still shaken, managed a nod. "It's our only shot. Let's move." They moved cautiously through the ballroom, their eyes scanning every corner for signs of danger. The room seemed to shift subtly as they walked, the walls breathing with a life of their own. It was as if the building itself was aware of their presence, watching, waiting. As they reached the far end of the ballroom, Sam noticed something odd, a large, ornate mirror hanging on the wall. It was a perfect reflection of the room, but something about it felt wrong. The reflection was slightly off, as though the room on the other side existed in a different reality. "That mirror," Sam said, stepping closer. "There's something behind it." Wainwright approached cautiously, examining the frame. "There's a hidden latch here," he said, running his fingers along the edge. "It's a door." Without hesitation, Sam pressed the latch, and the mirror swung open to reveal a narrow passageway leading into darkness. The air inside was cool and dry, the scent of earth and stone filling their nostrils. "This is it," Kara whispered, stepping into the passage. "This is our way out." The passage wound its way deep into the building, the walls narrowing as they descended further into the unknown. The sound of their footsteps echoed off the stone, creating an eerie rhythm that matched the beating of their hearts. Finally, they emerged into a small chamber, lit by a single, dim bulb hanging from the ceiling. In the center of the room was an old, ornate gramophone, its horn pointed toward a dusty, cracked vinyl record. The label on the record was worn and faded, but the title was still legible, "The Final Dance." Wainwright hesitated. This must be it. The final piece of the puzzle. Sam stepped forward, his hand trembling as he reached for the gramophone's crank. "There's no going back," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We finish this now." With a deep breath, he turned the crank, and the record began to spin. The needle dropped, and the gramophone crackled to life, filling the chamber with a haunting waltz. The music was slow, melancholic, and filled with an overwhelming sense of finality. As the music played, the walls of the chamber began to shift and blur, dissolving into a void of swirling shadows. The gramophone's horn emitted a low, resonant hum, and the floor beneath them started to vibrate. Suddenly, the shadows coalesced into a figure, a tall, elegant woman in a tattered ballroom gown. Her face was obscured by a veil, her movements graceful yet unnaturally smooth. She extended a hand toward Sam, her voice soft and alluring. "Will you dance with me?" she asked, her tone both pleading and demanding. Sam felt a strange compulsion to accept, but he shook it off. "No, this ends now." The woman's form began to waver, her features distorting as she recoiled. The gramophone's music grew louder, more chaotic, as if trying to drown out her cries. Wainwright stepped forward, his voice firm. "We reject you. This place, this nightmare, it's over." The woman let out a piercing scream, and the room erupted into chaos. The shadows swirled violently, the ground shaking as the